Hi, this is Frank Schaeffer, and I want to thank you for sharing my YouTube videos and for watching them. And I would ask you, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. It helps what I'm doing and get the word out. Thank you. Hi, my name is Frank Schaeffer, and may I tell you what the Democratic Party really is? Okay, my point of view is this. I come from a Republican family, and not only a Republican family, an activist, religious right family that in the 1970s and 1980s, if you had asked political commentators who were the most influential evangelical activists right now, my father, Francis Schaeffer, would have been named at the top of any list. What was he influential about? Well, sadly, with my help in making a film series called Whatever Happened to the Human Race with my dad, and Dr. Schaeffer, who became Ronald Reagan's Surgeon General, what our family was associated with was the beginning of the drive by the religious right, the Christian nationalist movement, to first take over the Republican Party and give them a series of litmus tests to test people's morality and even eventually the right to call themselves Americans by. This went far past politics. You were a bad and evil person if you were, quote unquote, pro-abortion. You were a bad and evil person if you believed that gay men and women should have the same rights to love, to be citizens, to be tolerated, to be protected by the law as heterosexual men and women. You were a bad person in my family if you even smoked or drank or played cards or danced. I came from an evangelical background that, despite denominational differences, had a couple things in common. We despised feminists. We thought that a woman's place was not just in the home, but always to be subservient to and obeying of male leadership, be that a father picking a daughter's husband, a church ordering her life or a young man's life, with a series of rules that were supposed to protect them from making mistakes, from backsliding, from evil. In 1984, when my dad died, I left that movement. Actually, I started a process of leaving it that ended in the early 1990s, but I began to escape my own indoctrination. And I look back now, and I think that that biblical indoctrination to be this domineering male can really only be described one way, and forgive me for the language here, but there was no question that what my upbringing did to me was groom me to become what I call an asshole by divine right. In other words, an asshole that believed that his assholeness was part of God's order, that my job as a father was to discipline children, including spanking, was to discipline my wife and make her obey me by shouting and arguing, quoting Bible verses, living in a community in which the domineering male voice was reinforced. And as I look back at the mistakes we made in laying the groundwork for the overturning of Roe v. Wade and stripping women of their right to bodily autonomy, the wickedness of telling men and women born gay that they are somehow sinning because of the way they are, the intolerance and racism that was part and parcel of entire denominations like the Southern Baptists that began as racist institutions deliberately formed to uphold racist policies in the South and give them a spiritual twist. I went from being this person who was part of that movement to being a dedicated member of what I'll call progressive America, that I like to think of as a more enlightened America. people who associate with the Democratic Party, the people who, like me, are now working hard to see that Kamala Harris and everything she represents is elected to the presidency, to roll back the MAGA party, this Trump cult built around a con artist who has fooled many right-wing Christian people, just like I would have been fooled had he come along in the 1970s, promising to take revenge on our enemies, on gay people, on women who were feminists, on abortion providers, on healthcare providers who treated gay people as equals, as people who were ready to talk honestly about the racist history of this country and what we have done to our own people in this kind of dual system of white privilege and everyone else. They would have been my enemies, and maybe I would have welcomed Donald Trump. I think my father and I would have seen through the fact that a man that holds a Bible up so a few years later can get $350,000 for endorsing a Bible, who sells sneakers, mediocre steaks, starts a fake university, cons people. I think even back in those days, we would have had grave doubts about this con artist, this mean man who only talks about himself, and seeks revenge on enemies. But nevertheless, we would have been grateful that we could get our own back against the, quote, liberal elites. We were at the beginning of the kind of conspiracy theory nonsense that's now completely overtaken the party. So what does this have to do with me saying, may I tell you what the Democratic Party really is? Well, from my point of view, sometimes the Democratic Party is really annoying because it has latched too thoroughly onto what I'll call culture war virtue signaling. But that annoying trait, when you look just a little closer, whether it's about race or gender or the environment, or starting talks at a college with a preamble about the land of Native Americans that was stolen so this college could be built, all these virtue signaling, diversity and inclusion things that sometimes look like nonsense to an old 72-year-old white privileged male like me. From my background, I have a knee-jerk reaction. It's a learning curve, but there's a deeper truth there. You see, what the Democratic Party really is the party that always errs on the side of giving people second chances. It's a party that's too kind and allows its own idiot fringe sometimes a little bit too much space to talk about things that appear silly to many people. All kinds of new inclusive terminology that everybody's supposed to use. So all of a sudden I'm supposed to sign my name, Frank Schaeffer, he, him, whatever. But when you look a little deeper, I have a question. Would you rather live next to a neighbor who's a little too kind and a little too caring and is ready to give the benefit of the doubt to your kid who screws up sometime and tosses something into their yard and knocks over a tomato plant? Or would you rather live next to someone who first reaction is to threaten, to intimidate, to hold forth on the differences between you and the way they keep their house? So, you know, the Democratic Party sometimes annoys me a little bit, and I think it drives some people away. It certainly provides ammunition, shoots itself in the foot with all its culture war stuff, with all its linguistic shenanigans to pacify this or that movement, or these or those people claiming new rights or reclaiming old rights. But these are the sins of kindness. These are the failures of bending over backwards to accommodate and tolerate and include. Funny thing is, I've been married for 54 years because I got Jeannie pregnant when she was I was 17 and she was 18. And we have 5 grandchildren, 3 of whom live nearby, and I've been doing childcare for them for the last 16 years because the oldest of those 3's just turned 16. And when I look at the way that I, quote, indulge them and spoil them and care for them, once in a while it goes too far. Somebody's a little rude and gets away with it. But the result is that my 16-year-old granddaughter texts me every couple of weeks and says, Ba, they call me Ba, B-A. I haven't seen you this week. Can we have lunch together? And my son and daughter-in-law text me and say, we're stuck at work. Can you cook the kids' supper? And they come down to my house because I love to cook and garden. And I've taught all 3 of these grandchildren, a grandson and 2 granddaughters, to cook and to garden and to build. We rebuilt a barn together during COVID. And if you were watching me with my grandchildren, you would say, wow, he sure caters to them. Look, she was rude. She answered back, and he didn't come down hard on her. He didn't give her a lecture about respect. He didn't shake his finger in her face. But the upshot is I have a relationship with them second to none, because I have erred on the side of kindness in a way that I never did as a fundamentalist evangelical Christian with my children 40 and 50 years ago when they were little. Boy, if I could only get that time back again, knowing what I know now. There were times they were scared of me because I was tough, because I believed I should be in charge and I was the law. And if they had said something crazy to me, like, from now on, I want you to call me they, I would have screamed at them and said, hey, don't you dare tell me that you've changed your view on gender or race. This is God's law. This is the way I see it. And you are to show respect and do it my way. But when I look at the quality of my relationship with my grandchildren, who I have, quote unquote, spoiled from that point of view of the fundamentalism I was raised with, I'm their best friend. They tell me everything. I'm there when they need me. The Democratic Party is there when you need it. The Democratic Party is a caring grandparent who indulges us. And on issues like gender and race, they say, if you're hurting, we're not going to yell at you. We're going to accommodate you. And yeah, sometimes it will seem a little silly, like an overindulgent grandparent, as opposed to a harsh young father. And the Republicans like to frame the kindness and the tolerance and the acceptance that the Democratic Party offers to the hurt, to the lost, to the uncared for, as weakness, as stupidity. Oh, if we recruit people like this, or they volunteer for our military, we'll lose every war. They're not tough enough. Man up. Well, Andrew Tate is that kind of a man. And he's now been accused of multiple rapes, including child rape. He's tough. He's a cage fighter, ex-cage fighter. He owns a Bugatti. He's a real man, right? He doesn't probably have a granddaughter that texts him and says, I haven't seen you this week. Can you take me to lunch? He doesn't have a 10-year-old who has problems, and he's the first person she talks to after school and tells him about her day. That's a very different view of manhood that actually goes right back into prehistory, to hunter-gatherers before we learned to read and write and divided ourselves into property owners and everybody else. We were hunter-gatherer tribes, and we survived because we cared for each other. The Democratic Party isn't some newfangled liberal way of doing things. It taps into a much more ancient, caring wisdom than our modern society knows. It doesn't only take a village to raise a child. It takes love. The Democratic Party is not afraid to say, we love you. We care for you even if you don't vote for us. There's a joy in the closeness that comes from love. Would you rather care too much or too little? You know, the kind of people who live as good neighbors don't write highly defined demarcation lines and say, this is none of my business. I'm a libertarian. You know, I have a neighbor who lives next door. Her name's Debbie. There are a lot of Debbies in the world, so I'm not outing her, IDing her, but you know, she's had a few heart problems like my wife Jeannie had. And I know how grateful I am that my former Marine son, who fought 2 combat tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq at the beginning of those wars, there's a picture of him guarding a girls' school on his own time so they could get an education. It wasn't part of his Marine's duty. Not a very tough, manly thing to do. I mean, he did have a weapon because they had been killing little girls and their teachers. And he's a good brother to his sister, a good father to his daughters. And he stood there guarding them at risk to his own life on his own time near Bagram Air Base. I have that picture on my staircase. He would fit in well in prehistory in the hunter-gatherer groups where men were not men because they bullied and bossed, but they were protectors. They weren't rapists. They weren't cage fighters. They were protectors, and kindness wasn't seen as weakness. So Debbie had some heart problems, and I remember the way John came running over and took Jeannie to the hospital because I was doing a podcast. Can you imagine? Excuse the language. Fuck me. I mean, I would have dropped everything, but she didn't think it was a heart attack. She just thought she was feeling unwell, but he diagnosed her. Can-do Marine, got her to the hospital in 18 minutes. Told her to tell them it was chest pain. Little white lie, it was back pain, but he said women manifest differently, and he was right. And within minutes, she's on blood thinners and attached to everything, and the next morning she gets a stent. He saved her life. Not by lording it over women and saying, who's in charge and I'm a male, listen to me and walk 10 paces behind me like some Saudi prince does to his 4th wife. This former Marine, a real man in those terms, you know, the kind of guy who supposedly all these Andrew Tate types thinks they are, but of course they aren't. They don't serve anybody except themselves, like Donald Trump only serves himself. These fake men. This real man dropped everything and took care of his mother. That's what real men do. And so, you know, when my neighbor didn't have a ride to the hospital, of course, she called. I took her. I got her established there and checked in on her and got her and brought her back. Because I wasn't saying, is this my role? Why should I do this? I'm a libertarian. I'm an individualist. You should have made better arrangements. Oh, by the way, she's single. I don't know if she has a cat or not, but she doesn't have any children. Like one of my sons doesn't have any kids. He's a teacher, so he has thousands of kids. He does mothering in a different way. There are people in MIT who got in there because he tutored them in math and cooked them lunch, because he's a real man. The Democratic Party is a real political party. It's not seeking to get something out of you. It's trying to help you. And these crazy people with 2025 and all this nonsense that they're putting together to strip us of our rights of Americans to health care and to Social Security that I live on now so I can take care of my grandchildren, and Medicare that I use now because I'm in my 70s. I don't want federal employees who are appointees of Donald Trump because they agree with him. I want people who are there because they care about me. I'm an American. I have rights. I paid into Social Security my whole life. I don't want federal employees who are mirror images of these crazy fringe Roman Catholic groups like Opus Dei that control Project 2025 and are insinuating their insane, rabidly far-right logic into it, the same way the Supreme Court has insinuated its rabid republicanism into constitutional law upholding the right to carry weapons and kill people and commit suicide with a gun as a Second Amendment right, and strip women of rights because they believe in that too. And next is contraceptives on the list. I want my government to look at me the way I look at my neighbor when she called for help. I want my government to look at me the way I take care of my grandchildren. And I don't get into who owes who what. And if they turn out to be gay or trans or not, my reaction to them is not, don't lecture me about what name you want to be called. You're an idiot. It's, hey, it's your 16th birthday and you like oysters. I'll take you out for lunch. It's the kindness of the Democratic Party that gets it into trouble. But I just want to leave you with a question as this election comes. Would you like to have a party that errs on the side of kindness and wants to signal its virtues by inclusion and diversity? Or a party that signals what it's about because it's trying to please one jumped up fool named Donald Trump, who's remolded this cult in his own unforgiving, mean image? He's a mean man. He talks about revenge, not justice. And the fact that people from my evangelical background support this nonsense is mind-boggling, and that's a different topic, and I've gone into it in other commentaries on J.D. Vance and others. But I'm a 72-year-old grandfather, and the kind of men I like least are the guys that are virtue signaling their manhood by stupid toughness that they never actually have. Now, that's a kind of fakery that leads to real trouble. You don't want them as neighbors. They might take a shot at you through the fence to prove something. I'd rather be the guy that walks his dog in the morning. His name's Zip. And when people are on their way to work, they actually wind their windows down to say hi. I've called on them and they've called on me, and I don't ask them who they vote for because I'm a lot more interested in kindness in my neighborhood and making my community work, this little place I've lived for 44 years, than in who they vote for. And I want a government that looks at me that way too. I don't want Donald Trump clone appointees of far-right, crazy Opus Dei members running my government. I want competent people who actually love their country and their neighbors and who err on the side of kindness. So when we mock political correctness and we mock words like they for people who are trans, and we mock the gay community for making certain demands, and we mock Black young women because they are sensitive to abuse because they've been raised in a climate of racism, and we mock people who are hired like Kamala Harris, and we say it's because she was a DEI hire and a brown person and she doesn't have a child of her own, or somebody owns a cat and never got married, and we mock them and we say we only are interested in certain types of people. You don't want these for neighbors. You know it, even if you're a Trump supporter. You want someone next door like me who drops everything and drives to the hospital, not because you're part of the Trump cult, but because you are a human being. You are a daughter of God. You are a friend. And the Democrats, if I may tell you what the Democratic Party is, the Democratic Party has a historic record of being a good neighbor. And the Republican Party used to have people like that in it. My friend Congressman Jack Kemp, who was vice presidential candidate with my friend Bob Dole, who I knew pretty well. The Ford family, my mom used to stay in the Ford White House. Gerald Ford was not a jerk. He was a kind man. He was a decent man. And you know, someone I'm a big fan of, who's been president for the better part of 4 years, President Biden, did something you could never see Trump doing. He stepped down for the greater good, so we'd have a better shot of winning with Kamala, even though, in my opinion, Joe Biden will go down as one of the great presidents of American history. Look at the hand he was dealt. A failing economy, COVID epidemic, winding down, so much in the toilet, and he brought us back, and he did it with kindness. The big bills he signed for infrastructure, for instance, benefited red states as much or more as any blue states. He wasn't just hiring or just using people who he thought voted for him or agreed with him or would kiss his butt like Donald Trump, this insecure little man with his stupid crowd size fascination and wants to know how much he's in the newspapers and on TV. What a little person. We want someone big-hearted and kind. I want Kamala Harris for my neighbor. I want kindness. If you're going to make a mistake, err on the side of inclusion. You don't want to live in a country run by a cult. Democratic Party is distinct from the Republican Party because it's an actual political party. It's not a personality cult. We know that if Kamala loses the election, she'll concede. We don't know that about Donald Trump. He's an egomaniac. And by the way, he's not trying to get back to the White House. He's trying to stay out of prison. He's a convicted felon, and there's a lot more on the way, even with the support of his hand-picked ideological purist Republican court. And that kind of desperation, plus his egomaniacal personality disorder, his mental disorder, his clear dysfunction, including aging very rapidly before our eyes and misspeaking so often and unable to follow a train of thought without bringing himself into it. You know, forget Donald Trump as a candidate. You want this guy living next door? Would you let him babysit your grandchildren? I don't want Donald Trump for my neighbor. I want Kamala Harris for my neighbor. I want people who err on the side of kindness, even if it makes them look silly once in a while to an old fart like me. And I say, well, yeah, come on, I don't understand how to use the word they in a sentence anymore. Fine, I'm a writer. Learn. 20 years ago, I didn't know about what I thought about gay marriage or this or that. You learn. But if there's anything in my life I'm proud of, it's the times I've erred on the side of kindness. Let's err on the side of kindness one more time. And vote for Democrats all the way down the ballot and give them a majority in both houses and stop this rot of our court system with all these insane people who are now upholding gun rights but stripping women of basic health care. My God. I'm so sorry for the part I played in the insanity of the 70s and 80s that got us here. Forgive me. Decide who you want as a neighbor and vote for her. My name is Frank Schaeffer.